Welcome to ADHD Wise podcast. I'm Jannine Perryman, and this is a space for open conversations about ADHD and neurodiversity, bringing together lived experience, professional insights, and the questions that help us move forward. Wherever you are in your journey, you are welcome here. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on ADHD Wise podcast. Today, I'm joined by the amazing Nikki Masterman, who is basically the person that I go to whenever I have an issue for myself or for anybody else relating to human resources and neurodiversity. We are writing a book together. In fact, we're writing 4 books together, but currently writing one because, we're writing one. Hello, Nikki. Nice to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Jannine.
I'm Nikki, you've had your hair done literally today. Did you have it done specifically for the podcast, or was that just a coincidence?
No, just a coincidence. Every 6 weeks to get rid of that grey and remove the yellow and get it light again.
Very good, very good. Okay, all right. So we thought when we were talking about this podcast, because I go on your podcast and we talk about neurodiversity for HR professionals, whereas this one is HR for neurodivergent individuals, but we do know that we have following that is also professionals as well. So our predominant audience are people who might be facing difficulties in the workplace or maybe afraid of disclosing in the workplace. So what we thought we'd do, and Nikki and I have agreed this in advance, is try to give you what we think that you're going to need within the space of about 35 minutes, just the basics of what you might need. What's been the most interesting, and I haven't asked you this question in advance, what's been the most interesting neurodivergent related case that you've been involved in or that you've read about?
Probably the one I've read about, and I refer to this one. I mean, we deal with a lot. We obviously, as you know, we specialise in neurodiversity in the workplace, and we work with a lot of organisations and other HR companies on this. And I could tell you loads of tales about our clients. But there's one in particular that I always use as a judgment case study. For a reason as to why it's not okay, and there's dual responsibility and things like that. So there's a particular judgment where an individual threatened another employee, and actually we do see this quite frequently where there's a threat or a physical altercation or someone's sworn at or something like that, and we use this as a kind of boundary. And a judgment to rely upon to kind of go, it's not okay to do that, and use your neurodiverse condition as a reason for that. And that particular individual was already on a warning, was already on a final warning for threatening staff and being quite aggressive. And then he did it again. And needless to say, that workplace, to protect the employees, took a decision, and it was under the legal framework on this, that although they acknowledged that his ADHD impacted upon his behaviour, it didn't make him do it. Now, he brought a claim, and his argument to the judge was, ADHD made me do it. The judge, when he looked at the whole case, said, actually, I disagree. He said, I absolutely acknowledge that the business acknowledged you were neurodivergent and that you were ADHD, and they did have reasonable adjustments in place. However, you were already on a final warning for that. You did it again, and saying your ADHD made you do it is not okay. And actually, the business took the right decision to protect their employees because somebody else
would have ended up with the tribunal against them if they hadn't, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they would end up with complaints from the rest of the staff and grievances for failing to protect the employees from harassment, bullying, all of those other things. So, they and I'm not going to go into the law kind of phrasing around it, but basically they took a decision to dismiss him on the grounds of that it's not okay to do that and threaten other staff. And he had already been given an opportunity not to do it again by being on a final warning. And obviously he lost his case on that basis. And what that does is, and I have this conversation of meeting somebody's needs doesn't override the needs of other people, in simple terms. There has to be a balance. You have to protect everyone. It's, there's not, somebody else's needs don't override another person's. And that's a conversation I have to have quite a lot. But that enables us to have conversations where we did have a very similar case where somebody, and I'm probably going to swear a little bit here, somebody told an employee to F off, and we ended up having to have a conversation of, it's not okay to do that, because what he then said, but I'm autistic. And I said, but that, right or wrong, that is still not acceptable in the workplace. It's not okay to say that to somebody and then blame your neurodivergent condition. So this is a conversation we have to have all the time.
And it's so difficult because you can recognize there are needs and vulnerabilities that are underlying in these things. And it's one of the reasons why quite early on in a difficulty with an employer, there's like coaching, for example, is part of things. And you and I both do a lot of screening with regards to helping people to understand their vulnerabilities underneath. Because I can understand that somebody may be dysregulated and act it out of character as a one-off, and they might need something in that situation. But there is a line, isn't there, between somebody not being in control of themselves in the moment and somebody else feeling like they are being physically or verbally threatened. I'm a big believer in not taking things personally when someone's dysregulated. However, that is asking an awful lot of the workplace. And if it's happening in front of customers and those sorts of things have to be safe. The obligation is to create a safe space for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then maybe their stress levels are so high that it's not the right position for them to be in. And sometimes employment relationships come to an end because they're not the right place for the person. And it's not about condemnation. It is about, this isn't the right place for you to be. If it is triggering you to such an extent that you are not in control of yourself, then that's really not a great position for anybody to be in, is it?
No, it's not. And I mean, when we look at these things, it's not just having that conversation with the individual. We do explore with them and the employer, because it's normally on the back of screening and talking about things that are going on in the workplace, needs that need to be met, any performance concerns that we need to kind of support them with when we're looking at their strengths and their challenges, and recommending the kind of strategies and mechanisms or equipment or podcasts or books or coaching or anything, well-being support, anything that needs to be put in place. It's not just a focus on that. It's the bigger picture of actually what led to that. Have you got a quiet place to go away and regulate? Is the business enabling you to go for a 5-minute walk and be able to bring those emotions, under control and regulate your system? So, we do look at all of these different things that can be put in place to enable that person to learn to manage that. It's not just, it's not a case of telling somebody off. It's going, okay, we can see that affects you. What do we need to put in place that's reasonable within the workplace to enable you to be able to manage that so it doesn't occur again? And it's like anything, when somebody's ill, there's an expectation you're going to go to the doctor and use the tools and seek the help that you need to help with these things. It's not just and that's what we do when we do the screening. We're giving them the tools, we're giving them the recommendations, we're putting things in place, but they still need to use them. They can't just go, well, it's my ADHD or my autism that's caused it.
I think the dual responsibility is a really good way of putting it, because ultimately the employee has needs and the employer has an obligation to do their best to meet those needs within what's reasonable. And the employer has needs and the employee do what they can to meet those needs to whatever extent is reasonable. And you and I have some amazing conversations when we think I was thinking about it when I was, blow dry my hair, thinking about meeting up with you, and I'm thinking, because we look for the sweet spot, we look for the win-win, and you'll come to me and you'll say, Jannine, this case, I'm a little bit bewildered. Now, you are in your own right, quite well learned with regards to neurodiversity and inclusion. It is what you do, it is your specialism in your own right. But you'll come to me sometimes and you'll be like, Jannine, what have I missed? And I just think that is such a constructive thing, because you support lots of other HR professionals. So that means that if they've missed something and you've missed something, you come to me and I'm like, well, and we had one recently, didn't we? And I was just like,
we did.
The language that was used in that particular situation, I'm suggesting that person isn't just autistic. There's some trauma in that mix as well because of the language that they used. And you went, I'd not thought of that. And then you went to the other people, they went, I'd not thought of that. And so there's actually that lovely sort of like situation where we have that dialogue, which means that HR professionals can come to you knowing that if you probably know, and if you don't know, you have somewhere to go and ask those questions, But I think that is amazing. But from an employee perspective, I'll be in situations, or my team will be in situations where we're coaching an individual or something like that. And then something comes up and we're like, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem right. So I'm quite learned with regards to HR, which is why, with the fact that we're both really good at this, but I'm not an expert on HR. So I will come to you and I'll go, Nikki, what am I missing? And you'll go, well, and so we have that lovely
We do.
back and forth is so good. And the reason we're writing together is because we want those win-wins. But helping people to understand there is a dual responsibility. It isn't on the individual, and it's not on the company. It is in the middle. There is a dual responsibility. Though I would say it is often the case, particularly with high masking and particularly women, that they are masking like mad. And then the employer only finds out about it when they have done more than they can do in order to mask. And therefore, the employer probably does have to do the lion's share of adjusting, because this person has already given all they can give. And then a stressful situation hits their life on top. Their child gets poorly, their parent gets poorly, or they hit menopause, or the menopause journey, all of the perimenopause stuff. We see it a lot when we're of that
Yeah.
age as well, where we're we're pretty much we're a good way through it, and it's that whole thing of recognizing that individuals should be able to turn up in the workplace and say, this is what's happening for me, and the employer does have an obligation to say, that must be really difficult, what can we do to help? And I don't know that all employers see it that way, but that is their obligation, right?
Yeah, it is. And we've talked about this a number of occasions, because I'm self-recognized, and I've done multiple screenings that indicate I am ADHD with high traits of autism. And again, we've talked on numerous occasions. I discovered this. I ticked all those boxes, I realised 6 years ago on the back of menopause, and going down the rabbit hole researching after someone had noticed my son was stimming. And I'd suspected he was autistic. So I have the personal lived experience. I am that high masculine, high functioning female that's gone through menopause, and has all of the typical traits that present in the workplace. And my strategies came down during perimenopause and everything like that. And, I took the decision I didn't want or need a diagnosis, because I understand myself. It's what I do for a living. And I went down that rabbit hole 6 years ago. But, for those that don't know the relationship we had, I met you, God, two and a half years ago on the back of deciding to do my ADHD coaching qualification, which you were my tutor. So besides the rabbit hole and the research and the books and everything I've read, you are that expert that surrounds me. I never refer to myself as an expert. We've had this conversation. I see myself as a specialist. I have that expertise, but the reality is within the HR field, the HR professionals have been so caught up in the Employment Right Act changes that the reality is that, and I spotted this gap 6 years ago, there is a massive gap in knowledge of HR professionals, which is why we're on this journey with the book writing, and we support a high number of other HR companies and HR consultants that don't have the expertise and the specialisms that we've got between us, and we work really closely on that. But there's absolutely a need. I learn from you all the time. Individuals come to me, and we can't be the oracle in everything. I think somebody who is good at their job accepts they don't know everything, and they reach out to those that can help them.
Well, I get called a know-it-all, and I'm so not a know-it-all. I know what I know about, and I will give my title expert with regards to ADHD and broader neurodivergence. But I am not a know-it-all with regards to so many other things. But what I do have is a network of people who are an expert in what they're an expert in, which is why you and I are so beautifully connected. Okay, so I'm going to give an example of when I went to work last time when I was still teaching. The last teaching job that I applied for, I sent in my application. I didn't put it on my application, but at interview, I told them that I'm ADHD. And they'd watched me do a lesson observation prior to that. And I sat down very early on in the interview and I said, just want to let you know, I am diagnosed with ADHD. And do you know what they said? Thank you for telling us. We had already noticed. I was going for a job in a special school. So therefore the head teacher, etc., you would expect that they would be aware of those sorts of things. And it just kind of like made me feel so comfortable. Because I'd made a decision, because I was bullied in the workplace that I was in prior to that, and I'd made a decision that I wasn't going to go and work anywhere where they weren't going to accept me as me. So there was just no point. And I benefited then from a few years of working for a school, a head teacher, and a bunch of colleagues who accepted me for who I am. And then when I started getting media coverage and stuff, so I was in The Guardian when I was still teaching, for example, they were so supportive. They were like, yeah, if The Guardian's coming, we'll clear this space and they can come take some photographs there and we'll do this and we'll do that. How amazing is that? They absolutely celebrated me. And they had me train everybody else on ADHD as well, which was just fab. But they got somebody else in and then they realised they were learning more from me than they would from that person. But there is a thing with employers that they do tend to try and get external people in rather than that internal thing. But I just look back and I just think that's how it should be. But you and I both know that's not always how it works out when someone does decide to disclose before interview. What's the best, the worst that you've seen in that situation?
I'd like to think the best was mine, was my recruitment. So when we recruit, we're very transparent now. So we say, we've made all of these adjustments. We talk about, you don't have to put a CV in, you can share your link on LinkedIn. We send out the pre-questions. We say, we're a neurodiverse friendly recruitment practice. And so I would like to think that where we've recruited recently has created that safe space, because somebody I've actually just recently offered a job to, and she actually starts with us next week, actually admitted during her interview she was neurodivergent. And she's actually specifically asked if I would do the screening on her. Now, obviously, because of discrimination, that isn't something that's normally done at an interview. And I did have to say to her, if you would like to request for that, and I'll make it very clear in writing that it will not be considered as part of any decision making in relation to you. But if you would like to do that to understand yourself a little bit more, I am happy to provide that as part of the process as an adjustment for you, but you would have to put that in writing to make sure that I'm protected and it doesn't look like I've forced that on you, because obviously once that's planted in somebody's mind, it could be for somebody that maybe doesn't get a job, that they think that's the reason they don't get it. It can happen. And so she, we had that completely very transparent, and I thanked her, and she starts with me next week. And I absolutely see the strengths, actually, if anything, that report showed me the strength she's going to bring to the role, the attention to detail. I'm not going to go into detail of what it is. That's very private to her. But I saw all of those strengths and the benefits that we're going to bring to my business. And then when I actually looked at the challenges, like, we can support you with all of that, not a problem at all. And I wish every business took that approach, because the strengths that I know she will bring, because obviously I've got a particular thing about things being done right first time, quality over quantity, and all of her strengths show attention to detail, accuracy, all of that. And I'm like, that's exactly who we're about. What an amazing person she's going to be in this job. And I had a beautiful email of being grateful for her, because actually that particular individual hasn't had a great experience in their previous employee that they've just left. And I think I showed her what a good employee could look like. Now, this is something I encourage with our clients. The reality is workplaces are only starting that journey at the moment. There's still a lot to be done. We're at the very, very beginning of workplace. But I've got some wonderful clients that are going to me, how can we put all of this in place for our whole business? And they're wanting to offer screening to all of their employees to understand the deeper strengths that they bring to the business, not just those who are neurodivergent or declared that they believe they might be neurodivergent. So, that's beautiful to see in some of these workplaces that are able to offer that. And I would like to see over time that workplaces will do that. They'll look at it as an opportunity to understand their people. And that on itself will just create an amazing, diverse, inclusive workplace that enables people to thrive. And I would like to see that in all. And that's certainly one of the journeys I'm on at the moment. But there's a long way to go.
No, absolutely. So I just want to sort of give an example there, and then we need to go on to the what's your worst example. But I was just thinking about one of the cases that I'm involved in, where I'm under person's coach, so I know about it because the person tells me about it. And this individual was telling me that she said, my boss said to me in my annual review that there are some tasks she doesn't give me unless she absolutely has to give me. She will tend to give me the things that I am good at. So in this particular case, it was around sort of course content creation. So she'll give me those things, but she won't give me the sort of like the form filling in and everything else. And she's just like, I feel a bit uncomfortable because I feel like I'm not pulling my weight. And I'm like, no, that's your employer leaning into your strengths and leaning into somebody else's strengths, because maybe the other person isn't great at the creativeness and the being able to sort of like bring things to life as you. And so they're just looking at their team in terms of strengths and challenges and assigning the work. And yes, you're going to have some form filling in and some admin to do. And she really struggles with her inbox, for example. Email inboxes are horrible for individuals with ADHD, and she really struggles with that. And that's where she's got a support worker, access to work funded support worker, I should say, and they deal a lot with her inbox, etc. So they turn that into tasks for her, which is just great. That's what that's for. But she was feeling like she was being unfair on her team. But actually, when you think about it, that's best practice from an employer's perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, why not lean, whether someone's neurodivergent or not, if you've got individuals that have a particular strength or skill set, lean into it. Whether they're neurodivergent or not, you should actually be looking at the bigger picture of all of your team and leaning into them around their strengths and getting them to work and cross over together on their challenges. They can meet the needs of the business together. It doesn't have to be alone.
No, it doesn't. But we see it a lot, though, don't we? Where these
Yeah, we do.
everybody has to do their share of this, and this. Okay. On that note, what's your worst example that you've seen of practice related to neurodiversity, employment practice relating to neurodiversity?
So the worst one I've actually seen and heard about actually wasn't one that we supported. It was one I heard about from a friend. So a friend knew I specialised in this. She's a HR consultant. And she actually reached out to me, and she had her nephew who was autistic. Now, this individual worked for a big government public sector organisation. I won't say who. Someone that you would expect to have this nailed. They have the funding, they have the money. They are a national public sector organisation that should be leading by example. They've certainly got the funding to do it. And this particular individual has he has high needs to be met within the workplace. And it was following the pandemic, a high number of the workforce worked from home. And then all of a sudden they declared they wanted everybody back in the workplace for 2 or 3 days a week. Now, you can't just blanket this from an employment law point of view. It's a huge risk to go, we want everybody back in the workplace on Monday. It's PCP, without going into detail. It's a risk of discrimination. But they did. And this person suffers with anxiety on public transport as part of his needs. So working from home was meeting his needs, and that was a reasonable adjustment because there was no performance issues. He's done a really good job. He'd been there for 4 or 5 years. There was no indicators of underperformance, and the view was, we want everybody in. I'm like, you cannot blanket this. Actually, you're not meeting his needs by doing that, and you're risking discrimination. Now, this wasn't something we advised on, but when I heard about some of the practice and the conversations and just the downright arrogance of some of the conversations that HR team were having with him, and he needed his mum to support him in those meetings, and they were refusing for her to go in as well. And it wasn't a great situation. He wasn't getting the support he needed in those meetings. He got invited to a disciplinary because he wasn't wanting to come into the workplace. He was really struggling with travel anxiety, which was one of his autistic traits and needs that needed to be met. And they were just trying to force something. So he ended up going off sick, and then they started managing his sickness and putting him on disciplinaries around the sickness. And I'm like, really? They're counting neurodiverse related absence, that's work related stress because they're failing to meet his needs, as a way to discipline him and put him on warnings, they're asking for trouble.
They're in trouble, aren't they? Because at the end of the day, there is the part of the definition of what a reasonable adjustment is that it's like, what adjustments to make to enable the person to do their best job. And actually, if we get too stuck on they need to be in the work, they need to be in the building, or they need to be in the building every single day, because actually hybrid works very well for lots and lots of people. The combination of the two works really well for lots and lots of people. Lockdown taught us lessons that we seem to have
we are starting to forget them. And this particular individual started during the pandemic, so he's only ever worked from home. And actually, they've got a big open environment. When I explored all of this with my friend in business, and she was telling me it's a big open environment. Now we know I know he struggles with sensory. So going into that big open plan office with people walking past him, the sensory, the noise, the fake lights, all of these different things was just going to overwhelm him as well. So it wasn't just that he suffered with the travel anxiety. He was also going to struggle with the environment, and there was just no consideration. They were just so focused on, we have been told everyone has to get back into the workplace. They were actually not exploring his particular needs, and instead they were disciplining him for it because he'd gone sick on the back of it.
It makes no sense because nobody wins. That's somebody else's stuck thinking, isn't it? And we see some real sort of like challenges around that sort of stuck thinking. Okay. Is there anything in particular that you would like, being as we've got about another 11 minutes, to maybe a little bit less, like to communicate to a neurodivergent person who, let's start with, is it thinking about embarking upon a new job and is thinking about whether or not they say something or don't say something at the beginning of that process? What would your advice be?
I think there's a lot of fear for people to disclose they're neurodiverse when they're going through recruitment because they think they're not going to get the job because of it. I'm of the opposite thinking. If anything, I think it protects the decision that is made against you, because the reality is that if you've declared you're neurodiverse and you suspect they haven't recruited you for that reason, then you are protected from that decision, and you could challenge it in the right way and query it. I think it brings a level of, because you never know how people are going to think, I think it brings a level of protection rather than disqualifies you from consideration. And why shouldn't you have your needs met to be that best person during the recruitment process? It's okay to ask for the questions ahead of time. It's okay to ask if you can have the meeting recorded, to remember what you talked about if you struggle with memory in that meeting or taking notes. It's okay to ask for things that are going to enable you to be that best person. Because the reality is, if you're going into an interview and you're not disclosing your needs, you may not be that best person that can really shine and do that job.
And if they are going to discriminate against you based on your
disclosure and needs,
then they are, then I mean, it depends on how desperate you are.
They may not be the employer for you anyway, and you've potentially, they've made a wrong decision that they're at risk of a claim on.
Yeah, quite likely. And so everybody loses in that situation then, don't they? Okay, so let's think about somebody who is in the workplace and things are sort of like starting to go wrong, or there is a reason for someone to feel like they probably ought to at this point say something about what's going on for them. What would be your recommendation and advice with regards to how they go about that?
I would be asking for a confidential meeting with HR. I wouldn't, depending on the organisation, sometimes they have a good relationship with their line manager. I would normally say HR is if there is a HR department, ask for a confidential meeting with HR. Your rights are so there's still, again, this is where the education within HR is still coming in. You don't need a diagnosis. You simply need to believe you are, that it's having an impact upon you to be protected under the Equality Act. Now, the Equality Act is, I often, this may sound terrible, it's not a get out of jail free card. It is, what does that business obligations need to do to meet your needs? And they are called a reasonable adjustment. Now, a reasonable adjustment, when you look at the legal wording around it, it literally says a significant impact upon your day-to-day work and life that is projected to last 12 months or already has exceeded 12 months. Now, in reality, what a lot of people don't realise is they get wrapped up in this word significant. And actually, significant basically means more than minor or trivial. That's all a judge will look for. It's as little as that. That is the threshold, completely minor or trivial. That's it.
Just to reiterate, you don't need a diagnosis in order to
You
get
don't need a
support.
diagnosis. You don't need to prove it. You literally just need to demonstrate that you have a need that needs to be met, and the workplace then has an obligation of reasonable adjustments to support you. And it's about giving you an equal playing field to do your job. It's not you getting anything better than anyone else. It's not you having favourable treatment. The workplace needs to lose out of their mind that it's about someone getting favouritism and getting better than anyone else. It's not. It's what needs do I need to meet to enable you to do the same job at the same level as everyone else? And that's what it's about.
So I look at sort of like the way it's sort of like prescribed. This is how you do this particular thing. And sometimes that discriminates upon some individuals and doesn't bring out the best in them. And actually, it's just like, well, what does the end result need to be? And is there a different way, a diverse way of getting to that point that means that person can work differently rather than harder? Now, my view would be that would be inclusive practice, inclusive, it would be reasonable adjustment. It would just be reasonable practice. And therefore you need fewer adjustments when you have reasonable practice. But how would that stand in a court of law? If a person was saying, I achieve the same things, I go about things in a different way, and I'm being penalised for going about them a different way, how would that stand with regards to HR and employment law?
I think they're at risk because ultimately, when you have a job and a job description, it defines what you need to achieve, not how you need to get there. So it's a risk because we all work differently. I say to my team, this is what we need to get done. How you get there, I'm absolutely fine. Where you do your hours, how you do it, I'm fine with that. It may not be the way I work, but what works for you, as long as the end goal, how you get there. But we still have some people that get so focused on how they get there. And I'm like, why? The client doesn't care how you get there. Just get there. As long as it's not a detriment to other people, because again, nobody else's needs override anyone else's. It's about putting things that's right, that's in place. And actually, there's so much practice that we can put in place that could apply to everyone. Agendas and questions before meetings, that could help everyone be the best person in that meeting. A recording device to record that meeting. Nobody needs to take notes if you've got a recording device like Applaud or Otter AI or something in that meeting that's recording it for you that then sends it out to everyone. Although do be careful with that because, we did come across a client that had it set up to send it out as soon as the meeting ended, but when somebody had actually left the meeting and the two managers continued to talk, they said a couple of things that shouldn't have been said, and then it got sent to that in person, which we then had to pick the pieces up on.
But generally speaking, with regards to having meetings recorded, people shouldn't be saying things in meetings that they're not wanting to be held to account for. So actually having meetings recorded should just be I think it should just be a reasonable practice.
We do it as normal in our practice and have done for years. And we have it in our privacy policy that all of our telephone calls are recorded, our meetings are recorded. We use Otter AI in our Zoom. We have devices that we put on the desk when we do meetings. Because actually, when we're listening to meetings and we're listening to that person talk, we cannot actively concentrate and listen to what they're saying when we're too busy trying to write notes and get it right. Instead, we use a device that enables me to concentrate on that person in front of us and make sure we're all the best person we can be in that meeting. And if someone's saying, no, I'm not recording it, I don't want it recorded, then my answer is always, well, what have you got to hide? Because if you're doing your job properly and you're being professional in that meeting, and don't get me wrong, it's actually done us favours sometimes because maybe we've had a union rep that's got a little bit too aggressive in their approach, or something's been said that shouldn't have been. It's enabled us to go back to that person and go, that was really unprofessional and inappropriate. So it kind of keeps people in check as well and makes them act professionally. But more than anything, if you've got nothing to hide, just record it. And there's we've got non-learning platforms, we've got platforms that don't go out into the domain. You've got nothing to hide, just share it with people. So like I say, we have transcription services. So we have a transcription device that sends the transcription to that person, we're able to provide it afterwards. And we do that as part of our screening. So when we do screening, for example, when me and Jenny doing it, and I know when you do it, with our screening, we use a transcription system that records our conversation. So it then produces a report which we can check for accuracy of, yes, they're the strengths we covered, they're the challenges, these are things you disclosed to us, these are the recommendations we've recommended, and this is what we've discussed. It summarised it because that person, it's such an emotive meeting that it enables them to get it right for the workplace and the individual. And the reality is it goes to the individual first for them to approve it. And, if there's something we've missed, they'll tell us and we'll add it back in if it's missing. We won't change our professional opinions, but we will, if there's something factually missing or something that needs updating, we will absolutely do that before it goes to the workplace as a meeting follow-up, because that's what makes sure the right adjustments get put in place for them.
Yeah, I do know some individuals who would hate the idea of having their personal meetings around them personally being recorded. But again, let that person take responsibility for
we give them the choice. So we say obviously not everyone's going to remember this, and we do say that recording as it is not it's not disclosed to the employer as it is. We summarize the key points that's going to meet their needs and send it to them to get their feedback. Do they want it redacted? Do they want it withheld? We follow a very strict consent process around that. It doesn't go to the workplace. And the workplace have been in that meeting. It isn't anything they haven't already sat and listened to.
Yeah, I mean that's like one of those complications, isn't it? But I actually think that recording of meetings such as that just kind of makes sense for everybody. And if people know that's happening, then if you're not behaving properly in a meeting, then there's why not? And if it's a need-based thing or it's a cultural thing, etc., then we have to kind of look at those things, because the intersections of all of this are part of everything that we do.
I mean, we don't do it for coaching because that needs to be a safe space. We don't do it for coaching unless somebody has asked us to do it for them. So I do have one lady that I coach. She's a HR professional that's neurodiverse. She specifically asks for it to be recorded, and I send her the whole raw transcription. There's nothing, she manipulates it into what she wants, and that's about her remembering what she needs to do, because she can't concentrate on taking her actions coming out of that, and that's her choice. We're happy to do that for them, but we don't do it as normal like we do with screening, because that's about getting their adjustments right.
Yes. But ultimately, you've just basically got an AI tool that is taking the minutes for you, which means you're able to engage in the meeting. Because we know that with the working memory of somebody with ADHD, for example, they might be writing it and then it kind of like just goes out their head. So, all right, we have talked about a large array of bits and pieces there, and there's so many more things I kind of want to talk about, and lots of things there I don't feel like we've quite done justice. So I would love you to come back another time, Nikki. And of course, I go on your podcast as well, but I hope people have found this interesting and helpful, and given you pause for thought. We are here and we're about the win-wins. You might not like everything that we have said. That doesn't make us wrong. And you might see it differently, and that doesn't make you wrong. It just means that, Nikki and I, we don't agree on everything, but that's actually why we work together. Because when you have conversations with people you don't agree with, that you actually find where the win-wins are. Because you might bring something to me, or anybody might bring something to me, and I might sit there and go, yeah, I missed that. And that's that whole thing around I know my stuff well enough to feel like I can learn. So if you think we've got anything wrong on this, I really encourage you to send us an email and say, hang on a second, what about this? Because we need to have those rich conversations so that we can improve our practice. Because we improve our practice, we improve the practice. And Nikki and I are all about the win-wins. So feel free to email. I think we've missed something. Please comment, particularly if you like what we've talked about, because obviously, it helps to sort of spread the word. If you think this has been helpful, if you want your HR manager to hear it, you want your line manager to hear it, you share it with them. That's what this is for. It's been lovely to spend this time with you, Nikki. Thank you, everybody, who's been listening. And we will see you all next time on another ADHD or other neurodiversity-related topic. Lovely to see everybody. Thank you, Nikki. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to ADHD Wise podcast. ADHD Wise exists to help bridge understanding and support for people exploring ADHD and broader neurodiversity. If you would like to know more about us and our services, please visit www.adhdwise.uk.
Follow ADHD Wise UK on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn.
Take care and we'll see you next time.